Hey guys, tonight we are charting the unknown. The world outside is vast and dangerous, but in here we capture it with ink and geometry. We are joining the medieval cartographer. We are going to draw the lines that guided explorers to the edge of the map and back again. This is a story about patience, pigment, and the shape of the world. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Now, listen to the quill on the parchment, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The scriptorium is quiet. Not silent, never truly silent, but quiet in a way that makes every small sound feel important, deliberate. There is the scratch of quills on parchment, a sound like dry leaves being pushed across stone. There is the occasional rustle of a page being turned, or a robe shifting as someone leans forward to examine their work more closely. There is the pop and hiss of the fire in the hearth at the far end of the room, flames dancing behind an iron grate, keeping the air dry and warm. Moisture is the enemy here. Moisture makes ink run, makes vellum buckle and warp, turns months of careful work into a ruined mess. You can smell the room before you see it. Old skin, that is what vellum is, stretched and scraped and prepared, but still fundamentally animal. It carries a faint scent, earthy and organic, mixing with the sharp tang of oak gall ink, which has a vinegar quality to it, acidic and clean. There is beeswax from the candles that burn even during the day, supplementing the weak light that filters through the high, narrow windows. There is the mineral smell of ground pigments, waiting in small clay parts for the illuminator who will transform this map into something not just functional but beautiful. And underneath it all, there is the smell of old stone, cold and permanent, the monastery walls that have stood for 200 years and will stand for 200 more. The room itself is long and narrow, with a vaulted ceiling that seems to gather the sounds and hold them close. The walls are thick, keeping out the noise of the world beyond. In here, there are no merchants shouting their wares, no church bells marking the hours, no clatter of cartwheels on cobblestones. In here, there is only the work. 6 desks line the walls, each positioned to catch the best light from the windows, 3 on each side. At each desk sits a figure bent over their labor, their backs curved, their faces close to the surface they are working on. Monks, most of them, though not all. The work of making maps is too important, too specialized, to be left only to those who have taken vows. You sit at the 4th desk, the one furthest from the fire, closest to the largest window. This is your place. You have worked here for 7 years now, ever since you arrived with a letter of introduction from the bishop of your home city, a letter that praised your steady hand and your understanding of mathematics. You were 23 then. You are 30 now, and your eyes are not quite as sharp as they were, though they are still sharp enough. Your hand is steadier than it has ever been. 7 years of drawing coastlines and compass roses, of marking the positions of ports and harbors, of calculating distances and angles. 7 years of transforming sailors' rough sketches and verbal descriptions into something permanent, something reliable, something that might save lives. The map you're working on now is for a Venetian merchant, a man who trades in spices and silk along the eastern Mediterranean. He needs to know every harbor, every reef, every dangerous current between Venice and Alexandria. He has paid handsomely for this work, enough to keep the scriptorium supplied with materials for 6 months. The prior approved the commission with unusual enthusiasm. Maps are expensive to produce, and this merchant understands their value. He knows that a good map is worth more than gold when you are 3 days from land, and a storm is pushing you toward rocks you cannot see. But before there can be a map, before there can be coastlines and harbors and the elegant geometry of navigation lines, there must be preparation. The materials must be gathered, must be prepared with care and patience. A map is only as good as what it is made from. Poor vellum will split and tear. Weak ink will fade in the salt air of a ship's cabin. Careless preparation will result in a careless map, and a careless map is worse than no map at all, because it gives false confidence. Better to admit ignorance than to trust a lie. The vellum comes first. Always the vellum. Paper exists, of course. The Arabs make it, and it has started to appear in the markets of the larger cities. But paper is too fragile for the purpose you have in mind. Paper tears easily, absorbs moisture, degrades quickly. It is fine for letters, for documents that will be read a few times and then filed away or discarded. But a map is different. A map must travel. It must be handled with wet hands and rough fingers. It must be unrolled and rolled again dozens of times. It must survive the salt air of the Mediterranean, the humidity of a ship's hold, the carelessness of sailors who have other things on their minds during a storm. For this, you need vellum. Vellum is calfskin, though the word can also refer to the skins of other young animals, lambs and kids. Younger animals produce smoother, finer vellum, but also smaller sheets. For a large map, you need larger pieces, and so you use calf. The preparation is done elsewhere by specialists who understand the delicate chemistry of transforming hide into writing surface. But you have watched the process, have learned its stages, because a mapmaker must understand his materials completely. The calf is slaughtered young, its skin removed carefully to avoid cuts or gouges that would mar the final product. The skin is washed, cleaned of blood and dirt and any remaining tissue. Then it is soaked in a lime bath, a mixture of water and calcium hydroxide that breaks down the hair and loosens it from the skin. This takes days, sometimes more than a week. The skin is checked regularly, and when the time is right, it is removed from the lime and stretched on a wooden frame, pulled tight, and held in place with cords or pegs. While it is still wet and elastic, the hair is scraped away with a curved blade, worked patiently from one end to the other. The flesh side is scraped as well, removing any fat or membrane that remains. Then it is left to dry, stretched tight, the tension pulling the fibers into alignment, creating a surface that is smooth and firm and receptive to ink. But even after it is dry, the vellum is not ready. It must be prepared further, made perfect. This is where your part begins. The sheet arrives at your desk, off-white and slightly uneven in color, with variations in thickness and texture. You run your hand over it slowly, feeling for imperfections. The vellum has two sides, and they feel different beneath your fingers. One side, the side that once carried the calf's hair, is slightly rougher, with a subtle grain to it. This is called the hair side. The other side, the side that once faced inward toward the animal's flesh, is smoother, more uniform. This is the flesh side. Both can be written on, but the flesh side is generally preferred for the finest work. Its smoothness allows the ink to flow more evenly, produces sharper lines. You are looking for flaws. Sometimes there are small holes, places where an insect bit the living animal or where the skin was damaged during removal. These cannot be repaired, only worked around. You make note of them mentally, planning the map's layout to avoid placing important information in those spots. Sometimes there are thin spots, areas where the scraping was too aggressive, where the vellum is translucent and weak. These are more serious. A thin spot might tear during drawing or might not hold ink properly. If there are too many, or if they are in critical locations, the sheet must be rejected, returned to the supplier, a new one requested. This delays the work, annoys the prior, costs money. You have learned to be thorough in your inspection. This sheet is good. There is one small hole near what will become the upper right corner, well away from the map center. There are no significant thin spots. The color is uniform, a warm cream that will provide good contrast for the black ink. You approve it with a small nod, though there is no one to see, and reach for your pumice stone. The pumice is a piece of volcanic rock, light and porous, rough to the touch. You keep several pieces, in different grades of coarseness. The first pass uses a rougher piece, held firmly but not pressed too hard, worked over the surface of the vellum in small circular motions. You can feel the resistance, feel the pumice abrading the microscopic irregularities in the surface, leveling out the high spots, smoothing the grain. A fine powder begins to accumulate, pale and soft. the substance of the vellum itself being worn away particle by particle. You work systematically, covering every inch of the surface, your arm moving in steady, repetitive circles. This is meditative work, requiring attention but not intense concentration. Your mind can wander while your hand continues its task. You think about the map you will draw. The Mediterranean, from the Strait of Gibraltar in the west to the coast of Syria in the east, from Venice in the north to the delta of the Nile in the south. You have drawn this region before many times. You know its shape the way you know the contours of your own face, the way your fingers find their way to your nose or chin without looking. But each map is different, must be different, because each client needs different information emphasized. This merchant cares most about the route between Venice and Alexandria, so that route will be drawn with particular care, its details most lavishly rendered. Other coastlines will be present, but simplified background information rather than the main focus. You set down the rough pumice and pick up a finer piece. This one feels almost soft, though it is still stone. You work over the surface again, refining it, making it smoother still. The powder accumulates in a small pile at the edge of your desk. When you are finished, you will collect it, save it. Nothing is wasted here. The powder can be mixed with other materials used for various purposes. Even the smallest scraps of vellum are kept, used for testing ink or practicing difficult letters or 100 other small tasks. After the pumice comes the dusting. You have a cloth, soft wool, which you use to wipe away all the powder you have created. You work carefully, making sure no particles remain on the surface. Any powder left behind could mix with the ink, create grittiness, interfere with the smooth flow of your quill. You shake out the cloth at the window, watching the powder drift away on the breeze, and then return to your desk. Vellum is ready now. You run your hand over it one more time, feeling the smoothness, the slight resistance that tells you it will hold ink without allowing it to bleed or feather. Perfect. You position it carefully on your desk, its edges aligned with the marks you have carved into the wooden surface, ensuring it lies flat and square. Small weights hold it in place at the corners, lead discs wrapped in cloth so they will not damage the vellum or slip off. Everything is ready, but you will not draw yet. Not yet. First, there is the ink to consider. Ink is the medium of permanence. It is what makes the temporary eternal, transforms gesture into record. A mapmaker's ink must be black, truly black, not the brownish grey that comes from sloppy preparation. It must be permanent, resistant to water and light and time. It must flow smoothly from the quill without clogging, without sputtering. It must dry quickly, but not too quickly, must remain workable long enough to complete a long line without stopping. The ink you use is called iron gall ink, and it has been the standard for important documents for centuries, will continue to be for centuries to come. It is reliable, tested, understood, and making it is an art in itself. You learn to make ink from Brother Thomas, the scriptorium's master ink maker, who learned from the master before him, who learned from the master before that, in an unbroken chain going back further than anyone can remember. The recipe is simple in its components, but exacting in its execution. Oak galls, iron sulfate, gum arabic, water, 4 ingredients. But the proportions must be exact, the preparation must be patient, the timing must be right. Brother Thomas makes most of the ink for the scriptorium, but every mapmaker is expected to know the process, to be able to make their own ink if necessary. You have watched him dozens of times, and you have made your own ink dozens of times under his supervision, and now you can make it without thinking, your hands knowing the steps even if your mind is elsewhere. Oak galls are the starting point. They are not truly galls in the medical sense, not infections or diseases. They are the tree's response to a wasp. A tiny creature, smaller than your smallest fingernail, lands on an oak branch and lays its eggs inside the tender wood. The tree, in defense, grows a hard shell around the intrusion, sealing it off, protecting itself. This shell is the gall. It looks like a small wooden apple, round and hard, often with a rough, knobbly surface. Inside, the wasp larva grows and feeds, and eventually chews its way out, leaving a small hole. The galls are collected in the autumn after the wasps have left and brought to the scriptorium by the basket load. You select your galls carefully from the jar that sits on the shelf above your desk. The best ones are heavy and solid, without holes, meaning the wasp has not yet emerged. These have the highest concentration of tannic acid, the substance you need. Galls with holes are still usable, but they produce weaker ink. You choose 5 good ones, each about the size of a walnut, and place them on a small stone slab. Then you take up your mortar, a heavy iron implement kept just for this purpose, and begin to crush them. The galls resist at first, their woody exterior tough and unyielding. But iron is harder than wood, and persistence wears them down. The first gall cracks, splits, reveals its interior structure, layers of pale brown tissue. You crush it to fragments, then to a coarse powder. The second follows, then the third. By the fourth, you have fallen into a rhythm, the mortar rising and falling, the sound of iron on stone a steady beat beneath the scratching of quills and the crackling of the fire. When all 5 galls are reduced to a rough powder, you transfer the results to a glazed ceramic pot, one of a set that lives on your desk, specifically for ink making. To this powder you add water. Not much, just enough to cover the powder and a little more. The water is clean, drawn from the monastery well this morning, sitting in a covered pitcher. You pour it carefully, measuring by eye and experience. Too much water will dilute the ink unnecessarily. Too little will not extract the tannic acid efficiently. The right amount is something you have learned to judge by instinct, the same way a cook judges the amount of flour needed for bread by the feel of the dough rather than by measurement. The mixture sits now, steeping like tea, the water slowly drawing the tannic acid out of the crushed galls. This will take time, at least a day, preferably 2. You cover the pot with a cloth to keep dust and debris out and set it at the back of your desk where it will not be disturbed. Tomorrow, or the day after, when the water has turned a deep golden brown, almost the color of old wood, you will continue. But for now, this stage is done, and you turn your attention back to the map. Except you cannot draw yet, because you need the ink to be ready first, and it is not. This is the rhythm of the work. Preparation, waiting, everything in its time. Nothing can be rushed. You could use ink that Brother Thomas has made. There is always a supply available, but you prefer your own. Each batch is slightly different, and you have learned how your own ink behaves, how it flows, how long it takes to dry, how black it becomes. These small differences matter when you are drawing lines that must be perfectly straight, perfectly consistent. So you wait, and while you wait, you work on other tasks. There is always other work. You have a smaller map, nearly complete, that needs only its decorative elements finished. You have notes from a ship's captain who visited last week, describing a new hazard he discovered off the coast of Crete, a rock shelf that nearly tore out his hull, unmarked on any existing map. You will add this to your reference documents, and it will appear on future maps, and other ships will avoid it, and the captain's near disaster will prevent other disasters. This is the purpose of the work. Not beauty, though there is beauty in it. Not art, though it is an art. The purpose is utility. The purpose is survival. The next day arrives in the same way all days arrive in the scriptorium, with the ringing of the bell for lauds, the pre-dawn prayer. You attend, standing in the cold chapel with the monks, though you are not one of them. Your breath makes clouds in the air. The chant rises and falls, familiar and comforting. Then breakfast, simple bread and ale, eaten in silence in the refectory. Then to the scriptorium, to the work. You check your steeping galls first thing. The water has changed color dramatically, now a rich brown the color of chestnuts. You lift the pot and sniff it. There is a sharpness to the smell, astringent and clean, almost medicinal. This is the tannic acid, released from the crushed galls into the water. Perfect. You strain the liquid through a piece of fine linen cloth, separating the liquid from the solid remnants of the galls. the solids you discard. The liquid you pour back into the pot, and to it you add the second ingredient. Iron sulfate is a greenish crystal mined from certain rocks or created through the weathering of iron in water. You purchase it from an apothecary in the city, where it is sold for various purposes, medicinal and otherwise. You keep it in a small stoppered jar, protected from moisture. The crystals are pale green, almost translucent, and they have a metallic smell. You measure out a small amount, perhaps a quarter of the volume of the gall water, and add it to the pot. Immediately, the liquid begins to change. The brown darkens, shifts toward black, though it is not truly black yet, more of a very dark gray-brown. You stir it with a wooden stick, watching the crystals dissolve, watching the color continue to deepen. This is where the magic happens, though of course it is not magic, it is chemistry, though that word is not one you would use. The tannic acid from the galls reacts with the iron sulfate, creating a new substance, a dark pigment that will darken further as it is exposed to air. This is why iron gall ink appears to darken after it is written. When the quill first touches the vellum, the ink is a brown-black. Minutes later, as oxygen from the air combines with the mixture, it turns a deeper, richer black. Hours later, it is as black as anything made by human hands can be. But the ink is still not complete. It is thin, watery. It would run on the vellum, would feather and spread, would be impossible to control. You need to thicken it, give it body. For this, you use gum arabic, the sap of certain acacia trees that grow in the hot lands to the south. The gum arrives as small, irregular chunks, hard and glassy, amber-colored and translucent. You take a piece about the size of a pea and drop it into the liquid. It does not dissolve immediately. It needs time, needs warmth. You could heat the pot gently over the fire, but you have learned that patience produces better results. Heat can change the properties of the ink in subtle ways. Better to let it sit, to let the gum slowly soften and dissolve into the liquid on its own. This will take another day. You cover the pot again and set it aside. 2 days now you have waited, 2 days of preparation, and you still have not drawn a single line. But this is normal. This is right. The work cannot be hurried. On the third day, the ink is ready. You stir it slowly, feeling the resistance, the slight thickness that tells you the gum arabic has done its work. You dip a test quill, an old one kept just for testing, into the ink and make a mark on a scrap of vellum. The ink flows smoothly, leaves a clean line. It is darker than it was yesterday, but it will darken further still. By tomorrow, this test mark will be as black as a moonless midnight. You smile, satisfied. Perfect. Now you can begin. But what you begin with is not the coastline, not the details, not the harbors and cities, and all the information that makes a map useful. What you begin with is the underlying structure, the geometric framework that makes navigation possible. You begin with the grid. Medieval navigation is not like ancient navigation. The ancients stayed close to shore, used landmarks, followed routes they had memorized. Medieval sailors, the ones who will use this map, venture farther from land. They cross open water where there are no landmarks, where the only guides are the stars and the compass. And to use a compass effectively, they need a different kind of map, one that shows not just where places are, but what direction to sail to get from one place to another. This is where the grid comes in, the system of lines called Rhumb Lines, or loxodromes by scholars who care about such things. Imagine a point on the map. From this point, draw straight lines in every direction, like rays of light from a sun. 8 primary directions, corresponding to the 8 principal winds that sailors know. North, northeast, east, southeast, south, southwest, west, northwest. Each line extends across the map, running perfectly straight from one edge to the other. Now imagine doing this not from one point, but from many points, arranged in a circle around the edge of the map. 16 points, perhaps, or 32, depending on the size and precision required. From each point, 8 lines radiate outward. The result is a web of intersecting lines covering the entire map, a geometric lattice that looks chaotic at first, but is actually perfectly ordered. This is the secret of the Portolan chart, the kind of map you are making. A sailor does not need to know the exact latitude and longitude of his destination. Those are concepts only scholars worry about. He needs to know what direction to sail. If he is in Venice and wants to reach Alexandria, he looks at the map, finds the line that connects those two cities, and follows that line with his eye back to the nearest compass rose. The line might run southeast by south. That is his bearing. He sets his compass to that bearing and sails in that direction. And eventually, if the winds cooperate and his calculations are correct, he will reach Alexandria. But drawing this grid requires absolute precision. The lines must be perfectly straight. The angles must be exact. Any error, however small, will compound across the map, will lead sailors astray, will turn a useful tool into a dangerous lie. And so you prepare carefully, more carefully than for any other part of the map. First, you must establish the center points, the locations from which the Rhumb Lines will radiate. These are usually arranged in a circle around the edge of the map area. For a map of this size, covering the whole Mediterranean, you will use 16 centers, evenly spaced. You take up your dividers, a tool of iron with two sharp points connected by an adjustable pivot. You set the points to the correct spacing, measured against a ruler you keep for this purpose. Then you mark the centers, pricking the vellum lightly with one point of the divider, making a tiny hole. Not a hole that goes all the way through, just a depression, a mark to guide your later work. You work around the circle, placing each center point with care. The spacing must be exactly equal, or the grid will be distorted. You check your work by measuring the distance between adjacent centers, making sure it is consistent. It is. Good. Now comes the most delicate part. You must draw the lines themselves. For this, you need a straight edge, and not just any straight edge. You have a ruler made specifically for this purpose. A thin piece of hardwood, perfectly flat, its edge as straight as human hands can make it. It is longer than the map is wide, so you can draw a line all the way across without moving the ruler. You position the ruler carefully, aligning its edge with two center points, one on each side of the map. You hold it firmly with your left hand, making sure it cannot shift or slip. Then you take up your quill. The quill is freshly cut, its nib sharp and fine. You have prepared several, because quills dull quickly and you will need to change them often. You dip the quill in your fresh ink, not too deep, just enough to fill the hollow shaft. Excess ink you wipe away against the edge of the pot. You do not want a blob of ink to drop onto the vellum at the wrong moment. You bring the quill to the vellum, touching it lightly to the starting point, one of the center marks you made earlier. Then, in one smooth motion, you draw the quill along the edge of the ruler, pulling it toward you, letting the ink flow out in a thin, perfectly straight line. The line appears brown-black, a hair's breadth wide. You lift the quill at the end of the stroke and the line is complete, perfectly straight, perfectly positioned. One down. You allow yourself a moment of satisfaction, then continue. The next line radiating at a 45-degree angle from the first. Then the next and the next. 8 lines from this center point, like spokes in a wheel. Then you move to the next center point and repeat the process. 8 more lines. This is slow work, demanding work. Each line must be perfect. You cannot erase on vellum, not without damaging the surface, potentially ruining the entire sheet. Every stroke must be right the first time. Your hand must be steady. Your eye must be sure. You work for hours, stopping only when the light begins to fail, when the angle of the sun through the window makes it hard to see clearly. You have completed perhaps half the grid. Tomorrow you will finish. That night you dream of lines, straight and black, radiating outward into infinity, dividing space into ordered segments. It is not an unpleasant dream. There is comfort in order, in precision, in knowing where everything belongs. The next day you complete the grid. By mid-afternoon, the entire map is covered with the web of Rhumb lines, hundreds of them, intersecting and overlapping, creating complex geometric patterns. To someone who does not understand, it might look like meaningless scribbling. But to a sailor, it is the most important part of the map, more important than the coastlines themselves. The coastlines show where you cannot go. The Rhumb Lines show where you can. You sit back and examine your work. The lines are good, straight, evenly spaced, properly angled. Here and there, the ink has darkened to its final black, creating a stark contrast against the pale vellum. In other places, it is still darkening, the chemical reaction still proceeding. By tomorrow, it will all be uniform, all equally black. You allow yourself a brief moment of pride. This part is done, and it is done well. Now, finally, you can draw the coast. The Mediterranean is an old sea, sailed for thousands of years by countless peoples. The Phoenicians knew it, and the Greeks, and the Romans. Every harbor, every headland, every dangerous rock has been visited 100,000 times. And yet, for all this familiarity, accurate maps of its coastline are surprisingly rare. Most sailors navigate from memory, from experience, from stories passed down from older sailors to younger ones. They know that 3 days' sail south from Sicily will bring them to the African coast, that a certain mountain peak means they are nearing Crete, that when they see a particular constellation at a particular angle, they should turn east to avoid a reef. But memory is fallible. Stories change in the telling. Storms drive ships off course into unfamiliar waters, and then the old knowledge is useless. What is needed is something permanent, reliable, something that can be consulted in the middle of the night by the light of a lantern, something that will tell a lost sailor exactly where he is and how to get where he needs to go. This is what you are making. Your sources are various. You have other maps, older ones, drawn by other cartographers. You have portolans, which are not maps but written descriptions of coastlines, telling a sailor what to look for, how long to sail between landmarks, what hazards to avoid. You have your own notes from conversations with sailors, ship's captains, merchants who have sailed these waters for decades. And you have something new, something that is slowly changing the art of cartography, making it more accurate than ever before. You have measurements. Merchant Consortium in Genoa has been paying sailors to measure distances systematically, using a technique called dead reckoning. A ship sails a known course, and the crew records the ship's speed and direction at regular intervals. Speed is measured using a log line, a rope with knots tied at regular intervals that is thrown overboard. As the ship moves forward, the rope pays out, and a sailor counts how many knots pass through his hands in a fixed amount of time. Hence the term knots for a ship's speed. Direction is measured using a compass, a magnetized needle floating in a bowl of water or oil, always pointing north. By combining speed and direction over time, you can calculate distance traveled, and by comparing the start and end positions, you can determine the true bearing from one point to another. The Genoese merchants share this data for a price, of course. Knowledge is valuable, but the information is more accurate than anything previously available, and you use it eagerly. Your map will be better than the maps that came before because your sources are better. This is how the craft advances, slowly, incrementally, each generation building on the work of the previous one, each map slightly more accurate than the last. You begin with the most familiar coast, the one you know best from both maps and personal observation. You begin with Italy. The quill touches the vellum at the northernmost point of your map, where the coast of Istria meets the sea. The ink flows and the line begins. Southward, tracing the eastern shore of the Adriatic. The coast here is complex, full of bays and headlands, islands and channels. You work from your reference materials, consulting notes, comparing multiple sources. Where they agree, you draw with confidence. Where they disagree, you make your best judgment, favoring the newer, more reliable sources. The line curves and bends, following the complexity of the real world. Here is the harbor at Pulla, here the island of Cres, here the entrance to the Gulf of Cavarna. Each feature must be in the right place relative to the others, must maintain the correct proportions. A map is not just a picture. It is a spatial representation that must preserve relationships, must maintain scale. If the distance from Venice to Zadar is twice the distance from Zadar to Split, then the map must show this. If the island of Korčula lies directly south of Split, then the map must show this. Every piece must fit with every other piece, must form a coherent whole. You work down the coast of Italy, around the heel and toe of the boot, back up the western shore. Brindisi, Taranto, the Gulf of Salerno, the port of Naples, the mouth of the Tiber at Ostia, the harbors of Genoa and Savona. Each name brings memories of stories you have heard, of sailors describing these places, of the challenges and opportunities each presents. Genoa with its proud towers, Venice with its lagoon and channels, Naples with its dangerous winds that can spring up without warning and drive a ship onto the rocks. The ink flows from the quill in a steady stream, controlled by the pressure of your grip, by the angle of the quill against the vellum. Too much pressure, and the ink floods out, creating a blob. Too little, and the ink does not flow at all, leaving the quill dry and scratchy. The right pressure is something you have learned through years of practice, something your hand knows without your mind having to think about it. The quill moves across the vellum in smooth curves, in straight sections, in sharp angles where headlands jut into the sea. When the quill begins to skip, when the flow of ink becomes uneven, you know the nib has dulled. You set it aside and take up a fresh quill, already prepared, already cut to the right shape. You dip it in the ink and continue without pause. The work cannot stop for minor interruptions. The light is good now, streaming through the window at the perfect angle, and you must use it while you have it. You reach Sicily, the great triangular island at the center of the Mediterranean. This requires care. Sicily is a crucial landmark, a reference point for navigation throughout the region. Its position must be exact, its shape must be right. You have good sources for Sicily, including recent measurements from a Venetian admiral who circumnavigated the island just 2 years ago, recording distances and bearings with unusual precision. You use his data, cross-referencing it with older maps to check for consistency. His measurements agree well with the older sources, which gives you confidence. You draw the coast with care, the northern shore running east to west, the eastern shore dropping south to the Strait of Messina, the western shore irregular and complex. From Sicily, you continue south to the African coast. This is where the map begins to move into less familiar territory. The northern shores of the Mediterranean have been mapped many times by many cartographers, but the southern shores, the coasts of Africa, are less well documented. The information is spottier, the sources less reliable. You work more slowly here, more carefully, aware that you are making decisions that could affect lives. The coast of Tunisia, the great bay where Carthage once stood, now occupied by smaller settlements. The harbors at Tunis and Bizerte. Then eastward, the long stretch of the Libyan coast, mostly featureless, dangerous because of its shallowness and shifting sandbars. You mark the few reliable harbors, note the hazards. This is crucial information. A ship caught in a storm along this coast has few options. Knowing where the safe harbors are can mean the difference between survival and disaster. Finally, Egypt and the Nile Delta. This is the destination your merchant client cares about most, and you give it extra attention. The Nile Delta is complex, a maze of channels and islands and shifting mud flats. You show the major channels, the approach to Alexandria, the reefs and shoals that guard the entrance to the harbor. You include notes in careful Latin, describing the landmarks that signal the safe channel. A sailor approaching from the north should look for a certain tower. If he sees it to his left, he is too far east and must correct his course. If he sees it to his right, he is too far west. These details matter. They save lives. You work eastward along the coast of the Levant. The ports of Gaza and Acre, Tyre and Sidon, Beirut and Tripoli. Each has been fought over countless times, has changed hands between Christians and Muslims and back again. But the geography does not change with politics. The harbors remain where they are. The reefs and rocks stay in the same positions. Your map does not care who controls what. It only cares about what is true. North now, following the coast of Anatolia, the great trading cities of the east, Antalya and Adana, the entrance to the Bosporus at Constantinople, the greatest city in the Christian world. You have never been to Constantinople, but you have talked to many who have, and the wonder in their voices when they describe it tells you all you need to know. You draw its harbor with care, mark its position precisely. This is another crucial reference point, like Sicily, a place every navigator must know. The Aegean Sea is a maze of islands, and you draw them carefully, consulting your sources. Crete and Rhodes, the Cyclades, the Dodecanese, each island a potential refuge, each also a potential hazard if approached carelessly in the dark or in fog. You mark them, position them relative to each other and to the mainland coasts. The distances here are critical. A sailor needs to know how long it will take to reach the next island, whether he can make it before nightfall or should wait for morning. The coast of Greece, the Peloponnese, the Gulf of Corinth, up the western shore of Greece toward the Adriatic, the islands of Corfu and Cephalonia, the entrance to the Adriatic at the Strait of Otranto, and then, closing the circle, back to the coast of Italy where you began. The entire circuit of the Mediterranean, drawn in ink on vellum, accurate to the best of your knowledge and the best of your sources. You sit back and look at what you have created. It is not yet beautiful. It is functional, precise, but plain. The coastline is a single thin black line against the white vellum. The Rhumb Lines create their geometric web. But there are no labels yet, no illustrations, no colors. That will come later. For now, you have created the structure, the framework. Everything else is decoration, important decoration perhaps, but decoration nonetheless. This, the coast and the grid, this is the heart of the map. You check the light. It is fading now, the sun dropping toward the western horizon, the shadows in the scriptorium growing longer. Your eyes are tired. Your hand aches slightly from the hours of careful work. You have been bent over the desk for most of the day, rising only for meals and prayers, and your back complains when you straighten. But the work is good. The coast is drawn. The most critical part is complete. Tomorrow you will begin the next phase, adding the names of places, marking harbors and anchorages, noting hazards. You will add compass roses at the intersections of the Rhumb Lines, elaborate designs that are both functional and decorative, showing the directions with precision and style. You will add illustrations, small drawings of cities and mountains and other landmarks, both to make the map more attractive and to help sailors identify features from a distance. A mountain peak drawn on the map can be matched to a mountain peak scene from the deck of a ship, confirming position. And after all that is done, after every detail has been added and checked and corrected, the map will go to the illuminator, who will add color. Gold leaf for the major cities, red and blue and green for the compass roses, azure for the sea itself, though many cartographers prefer to leave the sea blank, arguing that adding color serves no functional purpose and increases the cost unnecessarily. Your merchant client has not specified whether he wants color. You will ask him when next he visits. Let him make that decision. But all of that is for later. For now, you clean your quills, wiping them carefully with a damp cloth, storing them in their barks. You cover the ink part to keep dust out. You check the vellum one more time, looking for any errors you might have missed, any places where the ink has smudged or where a line is not quite right. You find nothing. The work is good. You stand, stretching, feeling your joints pop. Around you, the other workers in the scriptorium are finishing their own tasks, putting away their materials, preparing to leave. The fire has burned down to coals. Someone will build it up again before the room is locked for the night, ensuring that it stays warm and dry, protecting the vellum and parchment stored here from moisture damage. But that is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is the map, and for today, that responsibility is fulfilled. You walk out of the scriptorium into the courtyard, into the cool evening air. The sky is clear, stars beginning to appear in the darkening blue. You look up at them, at the patterns you know so well. There is the North Star, Polaris, the fixed point around which all the others rotate, the star that sailors used to find their way. There are the constellations, the figures traced in lights across the darkness. The same stars that shine on sailors in the Mediterranean tonight, guiding them home. You think about the map you are creating, about the ships that will use it, about the lives it might save. You think about the chain of knowledge that produced it, the generations of sailors who ventured out into the unknown and returned with information, the earlier cartographers who compiled that information into maps, the merchants and scholars who funded the work, believing that knowledge of the world was valuable enough to pay for. You are part of that chain, a link between the past and the future, preserving what is known and making it available to those who need it. The bell rings for Vespers, the evening prayer. You turn back toward the chapel, joining the stream of monks and lay workers moving in that direction. Tomorrow you will return to the scriptorium, will continue the work. There is always more work. Maps wear out, are lost at sea, are destroyed in fires or by careless handling. New information comes in, requiring updates, corrections, new additions. The world is large, and much of it is still unmapped, unknown. There is enough work for a lifetime, for many lifetimes. But that is tomorrow's concern. Tonight you will pray and eat and sleep, and in sleep you will dream again of lines, straight and true, stretching across space, bringing order to chaos, making the unknown known, one careful stroke at a time. The coastline is complete, black ink on pale vellum, a web of geometry and geography. But it is still only the skeleton of the map, the bare structure. A functional map, yes, but not yet a complete one. What remains is to give it depth, to give it life, to transform it from a technical document into something that speaks not just to the mind, but to the eye. This is where color enters the work. Color on a map serves multiple purposes, some practical, some aesthetic. The practical uses are straightforward. Different colors distinguish different types of information, help the eye separate one element from another. A city marked in gold catches the attention differently than one marked in black ink. A forest rendered in green is immediately recognizable as land, distinct from the blue of the sea. The aesthetic purposes are more subtle but no less important. A beautiful map commands respect, suggests authority, implies that its creator is skilled and careful. A merchant who commissions an expensive map wants something that reflects his status, that can be displayed as well as used, that announces to visitors that he is a man of learning and substance. But color is expensive, more expensive than vellum, more expensive than ink, sometimes more expensive than all the other materials combined. The pigments themselves must be imported from distant lands, purchased from specialized merchants who understand their value. And the skill required to apply them correctly, to mix them properly, to achieve the right hues and intensities, this skill takes years to develop. Many cartographers send their completed maps to professional illuminators, artists who specialize in adding color to manuscripts and maps. But you have learned the techniques yourself, slowly, over many years, and your client has agreed to pay for the additional time this requires. He wants his map to be exceptional, and exceptional requires color. The pigments arrive in small packages, carefully wrapped, each one precious. They come from the storeroom where the prior keeps the scriptorium's most valuable materials, locked away, accounted for with the same care given to gold or silver. You carry them to your desk like the treasures they are, handling each packet gently, aware of what it represents. Lapis Lazuli is the most expensive of all. It comes from a single region, far to the east beyond Persia, from mountains at the edge of the known world. The stone itself is a deep, rich blue, flecked with gold-colored pyrite crystals that catch the light. In its raw form, it is beautiful, but as a pigment, ground to powder, it becomes something extraordinary. The blue it produces is unlike any other blue available, deeper and more vibrant than indigo, clearer and brighter than azurite. It is the blue of the sky at twilight, the blue of the deepest ocean, the blue of the Virgin's robes in the finest illuminated manuscripts. It is called ultramarine, beyond the sea, because it comes from beyond the Mediterranean, from the distant east. The lapis arrives as small chunks, irregular pieces of stone no larger than your thumbnail. You examine them in the light from the window, watching the pyrite flecks glitter. The quality is good. The best lapis has little white calcite mixed in with the blue. These pieces are nearly pure, deep blue throughout. You place several pieces in a mortar, a ceramic one this time, not the iron one you used for the oak galls. Iron can contaminate the pigment, alter its color. Ceramic is inert, safe. Grinding lapis is harder than grinding oak galls. The stone resists, does not want to break. You use a ceramic pestle, heavy and smooth, and begin to work. The first piece cracks reluctantly, splits into smaller fragments. You continue, crushing each fragment, reducing it gradually to smaller and smaller pieces. The sound is different from grinding galls, a sharper, more crystalline sound, stone against stone. It takes time, requires patience. Your arm begins to ache from the repetitive motion, but you continue. The fragments become gravel, the gravel becomes sand, the sand becomes powder. The powder is breathtaking. Even in its ground state, even as fine particles in a ceramic bowl, the blue is intense, almost luminous. But ground lapis is not yet paint. The powder is inert, will not adhere to vellum on its own. It needs a binder, something to hold it in place, to fix it to the surface. Different binders produce different effects. Gum arabic makes the color more transparent, allows the white of the vellum to show through, lightening the hue. Egg white makes it glossy, but also slightly yellowed. The best binder for lapis, the one that preserves its true color while providing good adhesion, is egg yolk. You have prepared this in advance, separated the yolk from the white, removed the membrane that contains it, mixed it with a small amount of water to thin it slightly. The mixture sits in a small covered dish, waiting. You add a small amount of the ground lapis to a clean ceramic palette, make a depression in the center of the powder, add a few drops of the egg yolk mixture. Then, with a small spatula, you begin to mix them together, carefully, thoroughly, working the binder into every particle of pigment. The mixture becomes paste-like, thick and smooth. You add a little more water, drop by drop, until the consistency is right. Too thick, and it will not flow from the brush. Too thin, and it will be transparent, will require multiple layers to achieve the proper depth of color. You test it on a scrap of vellum, a small stroke with a fine brush. The color flows on smoothly, settles into a rich, even blue. Perfect. You prepare more, mixing larger quantities now, enough to complete the areas you have planned. The Mediterranean Sea will be blue, ultramarine blue, the finest blue you can create. It will shimmer like real water, will draw the eye, will make sailors remember why they love the sea even as they fear it. But the sea cannot be painted yet. The order of operations matters. If you paint the sea first, you risk getting blue on the coastlines, on the islands, on the labels and decorations you have yet to add. Better to work from the specific to the general, from the detailed elements to the background. The sea will be last, a final blanket of color that unifies the entire map. So you set aside the ultramarine, cover it carefully to keep it from drying out, and turn to the other pigments. Malachite for the forests, for the areas of land that you want to distinguish from bare rock or desert. Malachite is a copper ore, green, softer than lapis, and easier to grind. It produces a color that is earthy and rich, the green of spring leaves of growing things. You grind it the same way, carefully, reducing it to powder, mixing it with egg yolk binder. The green is not as intense as the blue, but it is pleasing, natural. Red ochre for certain decorative elements, for the borders of compass roses, for highlighting important cities. Ochre is an iron oxide, common and cheap compared to lapis, but no less useful. It grinds easily, mixes well, produces a warm red-brown that adds depth and visual interest. You prepare this as well, building up your palette of colors, each one mixed to the right consistency, each one ready for application. The work of adding color is meticulous, requires a steady hand and good light. You use brushes made from squirrel hair, very fine, capable of holding pigment, but releasing it in controlled amounts. The brushes are expensive, imported from the north where the best ones are made, and you care for them with great attention, cleaning them thoroughly after each use, reshaping the points, storing them wrapped in cloth. You begin with the forests, with the green. There are mountain ranges on the map, rendered as small triangular shapes in profile, a convention that makes them immediately recognizable. Some of these mountains are forested, particularly in the north, in the Alps and the Balkans. You load your brush with the malachite mixture, not too much, just enough to complete a single mountain without needing to reload. Then, carefully, you apply the color to the mountain shape, filling it in with small, careful strokes. The green goes on smoothly, evenly. When the entire mountain is covered, you set the brush aside and allow it to dry. Egg tempera dries quickly, much faster than oil paints would, and this is an advantage. You can complete one element, allow it to dry, and move on to the next without long waits. You work across the map, adding green to the forested areas. The mountains of Italy, the hills of Greece, the cedar forests of Lebanon marked with tiny triangular trees. Each addition is small, but cumulatively they begin to transform the map, adding visual texture, breaking up the stark black and white of the ink and vellum. Next, the red ochre for the compass roses. You have drawn these already in ink, elaborate designs at the key intersections of the Rhumb Lines. They show the 8 principal directions with points radiating from a central circle. Now you add color to make them more striking. Red for the primary directions, north and south and east and west. You apply the pigment carefully, filling in the designated points, making sure the color stays within the ink boundaries. This requires precision. A slip of the brush, a moment of inattention, and you could ruin hours of work. But your hand is steady, your concentration complete. The red goes on perfectly, transforms the simple ink drawings into something vibrant and alive. You add small touches of red to other elements as well. The banners of certain cities, marking them as important trading centers. A few decorative elements along the border of the map, simple geometric patterns that frame the entire composition. These additions are subtle but effective, adding visual interest without overwhelming the functional information that is the map's primary purpose. The colors are drying now, the egg yolk binder hardening, fixing the pigments permanently to the vellum. You check each application carefully, looking for any unevenness, any spots where the coverage is too thin or where pigment has accidentally spilled over the boundaries. You find nothing. The work is clean, precise. You allow yourself a moment of satisfaction before moving to the next stage. Gold, the most precious material of all, more expensive even than lapis lazuli. Gold is reserved for the most important elements, the ones that must stand out above all others. The major cities, Constantinople and Venice and Genoa, the decorative capitals at the beginning of text blocks, the borders and flourishes that mark this as a map of the highest quality. But gold is not applied as a pigment, not ground and mixed like the other colors. Gold is applied as leaf, as sheets of metal so thin they are almost weightless, so thin that light passes through them, giving them a warm, luminous quality. Gold leaf arrives in small books, each leaf separated from the next by tissue paper. You handle the book with extreme care. Gold leaf is fragile, tears at the slightest provocation, can be ruined by a careless breath or a moment of humidity. You have prepared your workspace carefully, made sure there are no drafts, no open windows that might stir the air. Everything must be still, controlled. The process of applying gold leaf is called gilding, and it requires materials and techniques distinct from pigment painting. First, you must prepare the surface that will receive the gold. This is done with gesso, a mixture of chalk powder and animal glue that creates a slightly raised, cushioned surface. You apply the gesso to the areas you have marked for gilding, small circles, where the major cities will be marked, decorative elements in the corners of the map. The gesso goes on white and thick, dries to a hard, smooth finish. This provides the perfect base for the gold, allows it to adhere firmly while also providing enough cushion that it can be burnished later to maximum brilliance. When the gesso is completely dry, you reactivate it with moisture. This is the delicate part. You breathe on it gently, your warm breath carrying just enough moisture to make the surface slightly tacky. Or you use a brush barely dampened with water, touching it to the gesso just enough to activate the glue. Too much moisture and the gold will wrinkle. Too little, and it will not stick. The right amount is something you have learned through practice, through ruining pieces of gold leaf and learning from your mistakes. Now comes the transfer of the leaf itself. You have a tool for this, a gilder's knife, a flat blade without a cutting edge, used only for handling leaf. You open the book of gold leaf carefully, exposing the top leaf. It is incredibly thin, so thin you can see light through it, so thin it seems to float rather than rest on the tissue beneath it. You slide the knife under the leaf, lifting it gently, and transfer it to the prepared gesso. The leaf settles onto the surface, drawn by the tackiness of the activated gesso. You position it carefully, making sure it covers the entire area you want gilded. Then you press it down gently with a soft brush, persuading it to conform to the surface, to adhere completely. The leaf is so thin that it seems to melt into the gesso, becoming part of the surface rather than something applied to it. When you are satisfied that it has adhered completely, you use the brush to sweep away the excess, the small fragments and scraps that extend beyond the gilded area. These scraps you collect carefully, save in a small jar. Gold, even in fragments too small to use as leaf, has value. It can be ground and mixed with binder to create gold paint, not as brilliant as leaf, but still useful for certain applications. The gilded area is now covered in gold, but it is dull, matte, showing none of the mirror-like brilliance that gold is capable of. To achieve that brilliance, you must burnish it, and for this you use a very specific tool, a burnisher made from a dog's tooth. The tooth is mounted in a wooden handle, the tip polished smooth from years of use. Dog's tooth, particularly the canine tooth, is hard enough to compress the gold leaf without scratching it, smooth enough to create a perfect polish. You have heard that some illuminators use agate burnishers, polished stones that work equally well, but you learned with a dog's tooth and continue to use one out of both habit and respect for tradition. You hold the burnisher like a pen, but you do not draw with it. Instead, you rub it back and forth across the gold leaf, applying firm pressure, working the gold, compressing it, forcing it to conform perfectly to the gesso beneath. The gold begins to change, to brighten. The more you burnish, the brighter it becomes. The tooth slides across the surface with a distinctive sound, a soft squeaking that tells you the work is proceeding correctly. You work in small circles, overlapping your strokes, making sure every part of the gilded area receives equal attention. The transformation is remarkable. What was dull becomes brilliant. What was flat becomes reflective. The gold begins to shine like a mirror, catching the light from the window, throwing it back in warm, golden tones. This is why gold is used, why it is worth the expense and effort. Nothing else reflects light this way. Nothing else announces importance and value so clearly. A city marked in gold on a map is immediately recognized as a major center, a place of power and wealth. You complete the gilding of Constantinople, the largest and most important city on the map. The gold circle shines like a small sun on the vellum, impossible to overlook. Then Venice, then Genoa, then Alexandria. Each receives the same careful treatment, gesso and leaf and burnishing. Each becomes a point of golden light on the map. You add small flourishes as well, gilded crosses to mark Christian cities, gilded crescents for Muslim ones, tiny decorative elements that serve no functional purpose, but add to the overall richness of the composition. The work is tiring, demanding sustained concentration, but it is also deeply satisfying. You can see the map transforming before your eyes, becoming something extraordinary. What began as simple ink lines on vellum has become a complex, multi-layered composition, a work of both science and art. But there is still more to add, elements that will complete the transformation from functional chart to comprehensive document of the known world. You must add the monsters. The edges of the map, the places where known geography gives way to speculation and imagination, these are the domains of the fantastic. Here there be dragons, the old saying goes, though the phrase is more modern than most people realize. But the sentiment is ancient. The unknown is dangerous. The unexplored is fearful. And mapmakers have long acknowledged this by populating the blank spaces with creatures of myth and warning. You are not merely decorating. You are communicating information, though information of a different sort than coordinates and distances. You are telling sailors that beyond this point, knowledge becomes uncertain. You are warning them that the seas you have not drawn might contain hazards you have not marked. The monsters are symbols, representations of the dangers of the unknown. They serve as visual reminders that the map, comprehensive as it is, does not show everything, cannot show everything, that there are still mysteries in the world. In the Western Ocean, beyond the Pillars of Hercules where the Mediterranean meets the Atlantic, you draw a sea serpent. You sketch it first in light lines, barely visible, planning the composition before committing to ink. The serpent rises from the waves, its body coiled, its head raised and open-mouthed. The form is drawn from imagination, but also from descriptions, from sailors' tales of strange creatures seen in distant waters. Whether such creatures truly exist is not something you concern yourself with. What matters is the symbolic truth, the representation of danger and mystery. You go over the sketch in ink, using a fine quill, creating a detailed rendering. Scales along the serpent's body, each one carefully delineated. Teeth in its open mouth, sharp and numerous. Eyes that seem to watch, seem to warn. The serpent's body emerges from stylized waves, themselves rendered with careful attention to the curving, repetitive forms that represent water in motion. The ink dries, and you add color. Green for the serpent's body, using the same malachite you used for forests, but applied more densely, more intensely. Red for the mouth, ochre for highlights along the scales, creating depth and dimension. The serpent becomes vivid, alive, a presence on the map that draws the eye and holds it. In the far south, in the ocean beyond the known coast of Africa, you draw another creature, this one more draconic. Wings spread wide, claws extended, breathing stylized flames. Dragons in Christian iconography represent chaos, danger, the forces that oppose order and civilization. A dragon in the unmapped ocean represents the same, the chaos that exists beyond the boundaries of knowledge. You work carefully, building up the image in layers. First the ink outline, establishing the form. Then the base colors, green and red and gold. Then details, highlights and shadows that give the creature dimension, make it seem to exist in space rather than merely on the flat surface of the vellum. The flames from its mouth are rendered in red and gold, curling and spiraling, following the decorative conventions you have learned from studying illuminated manuscripts. Between the monsters in the empty ocean spaces, you add text. Terra incognita, unknown land, marking regions that are suspected to exist but have not been explored, cannot be mapped with certainty. Hic sunt dracons, here are dragons, though you use the more traditional Latin phrase, hic sunt leones, here are lions, which carries the same warning meaning. These inscriptions are rendered in careful Gothic script, each letter formed precisely, each word properly spaced and aligned. The monsters and inscriptions serve another purpose beyond warning. They fill space. A map with large blank areas looks incomplete, looks as if the mapmaker did not know enough to finish the work. By filling those spaces with decorative and symbolic elements, you create a composition that feels complete, that seems to account for the entire world. known and unknown. The viewer's eye has somewhere to rest in every part of the map, finds interest and detail everywhere it looks. You add more creatures, more decorative elements. A compass rose in the Atlantic, larger and more elaborate than the ones within the Mediterranean, its points extending into flourishes and curlicues. Ships on the water, small vessels with triangular lateen sails, the kind that actually sail these waters. Each ship is rendered in profile, carefully detailed, another reminder that this map is about navigation, about the practical business of moving goods and people across water. The work continues, days flowing into each other, each day bringing new additions, new refinements. You add labels to all the major features, writing the names in careful letters. The cities, the islands, the capes and headlands. Each name is positioned carefully, placed so it relates clearly to the feature it identifies without obscuring other information. The letters are small but perfectly formed, readable even in dim light. This is crucial. A map might be consulted on a ship's deck at dawn or dusk, in the uncertain light of a lantern, in conditions far from ideal. The text must be clear, must be unmistakable. You add notes as well, longer pieces of text that provide additional information. A notation near the Strait of Messina warns of strong currents and whirlpools, references to Scylla and Charybdis from ancient myth, but describing real dangers that modern sailors still face. A note near Cyprus describes the prevailing winds in that region, information that will help a navigator plan his route and timing. These notes are invaluable. Transform the map from a simple picture of where things are into a comprehensive guide to how to navigate between them. Finally, when all the details are complete, when every city is marked, and every hazard noted, and every decorative element finished, you return to the pigment you prepared first, the ultramarine blue. The Mediterranean Sea itself, the great water that gives this map its purpose, is still the bare white of the vellum. Now you will transform it into something that resembles the real sea, into a blue expanse that contains all the information you have so carefully compiled. You prepare a large quantity of the blue paint, more than you have mixed before, enough to cover all the water areas without running out partway through. Running out of a color in the middle of painting a large area is a disaster, because it is nearly impossible to mix a second batch that matches the first exactly. You will see the join, the place where one batch ended and another began forever. Better to prepare too much than too little. The blue is ready, the consistency perfect, the color deep and rich. You use a larger brush now, one capable of holding more pigment, of covering area more quickly. You begin in a corner in the Western Mediterranean and work systematically across the map. The blue goes on smoothly, flows from the brush in even strokes. You work carefully around the coastlines, around the islands, making sure the color stays within its boundaries, does not spill over onto land. This requires concentration, a steady hand, constant attention. The brush moves in long, smooth strokes where there are large areas of open water, in short, careful dabs where it must navigate around complex coastlines or islands. The blue transforms the map completely. What was abstract, a network of lines and labels, becomes concrete, becomes a representation of a real place. The sea is blue, the land is white and green and gold, and suddenly you are not looking at a technical document, but at a picture of the world. The effect is almost startling, even though you have done this many times before, even though you knew exactly how it would look. There is always a moment of wonder when the sea color goes on, when the map suddenly snaps into being something recognizable, something that looks like the place it represents. You work for hours, covering all the water areas, maintaining consistent color and coverage. The egg tempera dries quickly, which means you can work continuously without waiting for earlier sections to dry before moving on. The blue spreads across the map, fills the Aegean and the Adriatic, covers the deep waters between Sicily and Africa, extends to the edges where the known sea gives way to the unknown ocean. Finally, it is complete. Every water area is painted, the blue is uniform and rich, the entire composition is balanced and complete. You set down your brush, lean back, and look at what you have created. The map is finished, truly finished now. Everything that needs to be present is present. Every piece of information has been recorded, every decorative element has been added, every area has been colored appropriately. It is a complete representation of the Mediterranean world, accurate to the best available knowledge, beautiful in its execution, ready to serve its purpose. But you are not quite done. There is still verification to perform, measurements to check, quality control to ensure that what you have created is not just beautiful but correct. Because beauty without accuracy is worthless, is actually dangerous when lives depend on the information presented. You reach for your brass dividers, the same tool you used to lay out the compass rose centers, but now with a different purpose. The dividers are an instrument of measurement, capable of taking a distance from one part of the map and comparing it to another or to a scale. Every map includes a scale, a graphic representation of distance that allows the user to convert map measurements to real-world distances. Your scale is drawn along the bottom edge of the map, a line marked with divisions representing miles or leagues, depending on the convention you are following. You set the dividers to span the distance on the scale that represents 100 miles. The 2 points of the dividers are now exactly as far apart as 100 miles should be at the map's scale. Now you walk the dividers across the map, testing distances between known points. Venice to Split should be approximately 400 miles. You place one point at Venice, the other at Split, and check. The distance spans almost exactly 4 divisions of your 100-mile scale. Correct. You test another route. Genoa to Tunis, approximately 500 miles. Again, the measurement confirms. Split to Constantinople, nearly 800 miles. The dividers walk across the map, tap, 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 the brass points touching and lifting, measuring the distance in precise increments. 8 divisions. Correct. You work systematically, checking the distances between all the major ports, comparing them to the information in your sources, to the dead reckoning data you received from the Genoese merchants, to the older maps you used as references. Every measurement must be verified. An error in distance could cause a ship to run out of provisions before reaching port, could lead a navigator to believe he is closer to safety than he actually is, could result in disaster. The measurements all check out. The proportions are correct. The distance is accurate within the limitations of the data available to you. The Rhumb lines are properly positioned, radiating at the correct angles from their centers. A navigator using this map will be able to plot a course from any port to any other port, will be able to calculate sailing times and distances, will be able to navigate with confidence. You perform one more check, this one focused on the coastal details. Using a magnifying lens, a piece of polished crystal that enlarges what you look at, you examine the coastlines closely, checking for any errors in the drawing, any places where your hand might have slipped, any labels that might have been misplaced or misspelled. You work slowly, section by section, scrutinizing every inch of the map. You find 2 small errors, minor things. One label has a letter slightly malformed, and now that looks too much like an "a." You correct it carefully with a fine quill, making the correction so neat that it is invisible unless you know to look for it. Another spot has a tiny blob of ink where the quill deposited too much, a small imperfection on a coastline. You scrape it away carefully with a knife, so gently that the vellum is not damaged, and the blob disappears, leaving the line clean and true. That is all. 2 tiny flaws in weeks of work, in thousands of precise movements and decisions. The map is as close to perfect as human hands can make it. You set down the magnifying lens and allow yourself to feel satisfied, to feel proud. This is good work, perhaps the best map you have ever made. Your client will be pleased. The sailors who use it will benefit from its accuracy. It will serve its purpose well. But a map is not meant to remain flat on a desk. It is meant to travel, to be carried aboard ships, to be consulted and referenced and relied upon. And for that, it must be protected, must be rolled and stored in a way that prevents damage. The vellum is durable, but it can still be torn, can still be stained or punctured or ruined by careless handling. The rolled form protects it, makes it transportable while minimizing the risk of damage. You prepare for rolling carefully. First, you ensure that all the paint is completely dry. Egg tempera dries quickly, but you give it extra time, leaving the map untouched for a full day after completing the final touch of blue. Better to wait than to risk smudging or smearing something through impatience. When you are certain everything is dry, you dust the surface lightly with a soft brush, removing any particles of dust or debris that might have settled during the drying process. These particles, if trapped between layers when the map is rolled, could create pressure points, could damage the surface over time. The map is large, nearly 4 feet across, and rolling it requires care. You cannot simply grab one edge and roll it like a piece of cloth. The vellum must be rolled evenly, without creating wrinkles or creases, and it must be rolled with the painted side out, not in. This is counterintuitive. You might think the painted side should be protected by being on the inside of the roll. But rolling with the paint on the inside creates tension on the painted surface, can cause the paint to crack or flake off. Rolling with the paint on the outside means any stress is on the unpainted back of the vellum, which is more flexible and resilient. You place a wooden rod along one edge of the map, a smooth cylinder of hardwood about as thick as your thumb. You attach the vellum to this rod with a few small stitches of thread, securing it so it will not slip during rolling, but not so tightly that the stitches damage the vellum. Then, slowly, carefully, you begin to roll the vellum onto the rod. You work from both ends toward the middle, maintaining even tension, making sure the vellum feeds onto the rod smoothly without buckling or wrinkling. Your hands guide the vellum, feeling for any resistance, any irregularity. The roll grows larger as more of the map is incorporated, the wooden rod disappearing beneath layers of vellum. When the entire map is rolled, you secure it with a ribbon, a length of silk dyed a deep blue that complements the blue of the painted sea. The ribbon wraps around the rolled map twice, then ties in a simple bow that can be easily undone. The rolled map is now a cylinder, portable and protected, ready to be delivered to your client or stored until delivery is arranged. You hold the rolled map in your hands, feeling its weight, its solidity. This object, this cylinder of vellum and ink and pigment, represents weeks of work, represents knowledge accumulated over centuries, represents the efforts of countless sailors and merchants and scholars who contributed to the understanding of the Mediterranean world. It is a tool of power, in its way. A merchant with a good map has an advantage over one without. A ship's captain with accurate information about coastlines and currents is more likely to return safely than one navigating by guesswork and memory. Knowledge is power, and this map is condensed, portable knowledge, ready to serve whoever possesses it. You carry the rolled map to the storage area, a cabinet with individual compartments where finished maps await collection by their clients. You place it in one of the compartments, label it with the client's name and the date of completion. Eventually, the merchant will return, will pay the remainder of his commission, will take possession of this map and carry it aboard his ships, and it will begin its working life, guiding vessels between Venice and Alexandria, preventing disasters, enabling trade, serving the purposes for which it was created. But that is future. For now, your work is done. The map is complete, verified, rolled, stored. You return to your desk in the scriptorium. The light is fading, the sun setting beyond the western windows. The other workers are already leaving, putting away their materials, heading toward the refectory for the evening meal. You should join them, should clean your workspace and go to eat. But for a moment, you simply sit, looking at your desk, at the tools of your trade laid out in their familiar arrangement. The quills in their barks, each one trimmed and ready. The ink part covered, the ink inside as black as midnight. The mortar and pestle for grinding pigments, the burnisher with its dog's tooth, the brass dividers for measuring, the straight edge for drawing lines, the brushes for applying color. Each tool has its purpose, each is necessary, each is cared for and maintained and respected. These tools are how you transform knowledge into form, how you take the intangible understanding of geography and navigation and make it concrete, visible, usable. You think about the maps you have made over the years, dozens of them, each one unique, each one created for a specific purpose and client. Some were small, showing only a limited area in great detail. Others were large, attempting to capture the entire known world in a single composition. Some were plain and functional, black ink on white vellum. Others were elaborate, decorated with gold and ultramarine and vermilion, works of art as much as works of cartography. But all shared the same fundamental goal: to represent the world accurately, to provide reliable information, to help people navigate safely from one place to another. And you think about the maps you will make in the future, the work that still lies ahead. There are commissions waiting, clients who have requested maps for their own purposes. There are new discoveries being reported, new information about distant coasts and islands that will need to be incorporated into future maps. The work is never complete. The world is too large, changes too quickly, for any map to be final or definitive. There will always be corrections to make, improvements to implement, new features to add. This is what makes the work endlessly interesting, endlessly challenging. You are not preserving something static, but documenting something that is constantly being refined, constantly being better understood. The bell rings for vespers, the evening prayer. You rise from your desk, stretch your stiff muscles, and walk toward the chapel. Your mind is still partly on the map, on the satisfaction of completion, but you are also tired, the good tiredness that comes from sustained effort successfully concluded. Tomorrow there will be new work, but tonight there is only rest, only the simple rhythms of prayer and meal and sleep. The chapel is cool and dim, lit by candles that cast wavering shadows on the stone walls. You take your place among the others, monks and lay workers together, and the prayers begin. The chant rises and falls, familiar words in Latin, words that have been repeated in this place every evening for hundreds of years. There is comfort in this continuity, in being part of something larger and older than yourself. Your maps are part of this same continuity, each one building on the work of those who came before, each one contributing to the understanding that will be passed to those who come after. After prayers, the evening meal, simple food eaten in silence, bread and cheese and ale, enough to satisfy but not so much as to make you sluggish. Then the walk to the dormitory, to the small cell that is your private space, furnished with only a bed and a chest for your few possessions. You undress and lie down, pull the rough wool blanket over yourself, and close your eyes. Sleep comes quickly, as it always does after a day of concentrated work. Your body is tired, your mind is quiet. The map is complete. The vellum is rolled and stored. The pigments are put away. The tools are clean and ready for tomorrow's work. Everything is in its place. Everything is as it should be. And as you drift into sleep, you think once more about the map, about the lines of ink on vellum, about the web of Rhumb lines connecting every point to every other point, about the blue sea and the golden cities and the monsters in the unknown regions. You think about the sailors who will use this map, who will unfurl it in a ship's cabin and study it by lamplight, who will trace routes with their fingers, who will make decisions based on the information you have provided. You hope the map serves them well. You hope it brings them safely home. The darkness deepens. The monastery grows quiet. Beyond the walls, the world continues, vast and complex and unknowable in its entirety. But here, in this place of learning and craft, a small piece of that world has been captured, has been rendered in permanent form, has been made comprehensible and navigable. The work is meaningful. The work matters. The candles in the scriptorium burn low, their flames guttering, casting dancing shadows on the empty desks and the tools waiting for morning. The fire in the hearth has died down to glowing embers, still radiating enough heat to keep the air dry, to protect the precious materials stored in this room. The vellum sheets stacked on shelves, the jars of pigment, the bottles of ink, all wait silently in the darkness, ready for the next day's work, for the next map, for the continuing task of documenting and understanding the world. Outside, the stars wheel slowly across the sky, the same stars that guide sailors across dark waters, the same stars that you have learned to recognize and name and use as references for your maps. Polaris, constant and unwavering. The constellations of the zodiac, marking the ecliptic across which the sun travels. The bright stars that rise and set at predictable times that signal seasons and directions. The stars are themselves a map, a pattern written in light across the dome of heaven, and sailors have always read this map when earthly maps were unavailable. But the stars cannot tell you where the rocks are, cannot warn you of shoals and reefs, cannot mark the safe channels into harbors. For that, you need the work of human hands, the accumulated knowledge of generations, the careful observations and measurements and calculations that go into making a map. The stars and the map together, celestial and terrestrial knowledge combined. These are what make navigation possible, what make it feasible to venture out of sight of land and still find your way home. And as the maps are rolled and stored in their tubes, the world remains vast and beautiful, waiting for morning. The work is done. Sleep well.